She said I was controlling and abusive. My emergency room shifts kept me from seeing the truth. Until she tried to destroy my life, I always thought I knew what exhaustion looked like. My entire adult life had been slices of running on empty, residency rotations that mutilated circadian rhythms, 12-hour emergency room stretches fueled by tepid coffee, the constant hum of fluorescent lights, and the high-octane buzz of trauma base. Once, in med school, I worked 30 hours straight and hallucinated that my own heartbeat was an incoming trauma code. I thought that was as tired as a person could get. I was wrong. There's a different kind of exhaustion, the kind that seeps in silently, more psychic than physical, eroding the edges of your certainty long before it saps the strength from your legs. It's the fatigue of loving someone you no longer trust, of coming home from fixing broken bodies only to find your own life quietly coming apart. I met Anna 4.5 years ago. She was shadowing the ER as part of a social work rotation, fiery, opinionated, unsentimental in her compassion. She had a way of asking questions that felt less like small talk and more like the beginning of a manifesto. We started meeting for drinks after crazy shifts, shared gallows humor, a mutual respect for the chaos. The first time she fell asleep on my couch, I watched her mouth twitch in a dream and thought, I could marry this person. Years passed in bursts, stolen weekends, trips when schedules aligned, holidays where we'd both collapse on my parents' guest bed and ignore the phone. We moved in together 3 years ago, after I got a permanent slot at the teaching hospital. We rented a cold, bright loft near downtown. Half her art supplies, half my evidence of medical training. Anna floated through freelance contracts in public health, advocacy, nonprofit work that was both righteous and draining. Sometimes, I envied her idealism. I bought blackout curtains for my day nurse days. She hung plants on every possible surface. Everyone said we made the perfect trauma team. She diffused tension, I solved. She joked to friends that my ER brain was why the apartment ran like a minor ICU. Orderly, meticulously organized, sleep tracked on an app, groceries restocked in alphabetical order. I prided myself on my steadiness. Years of work had toughened me against panic. But the truth is, nothing about home life prepares you for the way a relationship can unravel in increments, especially when you're not home enough to see it. Looking back, the warning signs were there. Anna started working from home more often. She dove into online advocacy, late-night video calls, Zoom debates about ethics and resources, Reddit circles that were for decompressing. At first, I cheered her on. Between shifts, I'd nap on the couch while she argued into her laptop, the glow of her screen washing over sleeping plants. Soon after, she started complaining about being unseen, about me being emotionally absent. I was guilty, by necessity, by job description. The world doesn't wait for your relationship to recalibrate. Trauma doesn't text to ask if now is a good time to come through the ambulance bay doors. I tried to make up for my scattered attention with grand gestures. Uber Eats on her favorite nights, tickets to art exhibits, overpriced candles from Instagram ads she liked. Anna smiled, thanked me, and then, sometimes, would go radio silent for a day. It's hard to notice a distance growing when you're always rushing from one emergency to the next. The first real fight started small. She snapped one morning, standing in the kitchen in my ER hoodie, that I forgot to wash her favorite blouse. I stammered apologies, cited a 14-hour shift that ended at 5 a.m. She rolled her eyes, muttered, "You run traumas for a living but can't manage a laundry basket?" It hurt more than it should have. I paced, tried to make the peace, flowers that wilted on the counter, takeout untouched. Anna remained withdrawn, scrolling her phone endlessly, carving out little islands of privacy I wasn't invited to. When I asked what she was working on, she'd bristle. "Your life is in the hospital. Let me have mine." Habits set in, not all of them healthy. I picked up overtime, covered holidays so younger residents could be with their kids. Anna started making recurring Zoom calls in the other room, laughing in a way I hadn't heard in a while. My hours jumped to 70 a week, old territory for me, as natural as breathing. But now, coming home was like walking into someone else's house, never quite knowing who you'd find. Physical affection dwindled. Conversation thinned to logistics, food, bills, social calendar. Anna's texts, once frantic and sweet, became clipped. Sometimes, I'd look up from a chart and find she hadn't messaged in 12 hours. If I asked, She replied, "You know where to find me." I chalked it up to burnout, hers and mine. Everyone was tired. Everyone short on patience after a pandemic that stretched us all thin. I trusted the bedrock of who we were. Two people who'd survived the same late-night chaos. Who, in theory, understood each other's scars. But I misjudged the force with which time and neglect can shift tectonic plates. Sometime that spring, Anna suggested we add a home security system. For peace of mind, she said, with all the stuff going on around the building. Break-ins had happened on other floors. I agreed at once. Logical, responsible. We installed two small cameras, one in the entryway, one covering the living room and kitchen. Nothing pointed at bedrooms or bathrooms, my line drawn. She set up passwords, cloud backup, the works. The months blurred, graveyard shifts, code blues, Anna's new habit of taking calls on the balcony, her voice low. The apartment took on a strange choreography. I'd leave in scrubs at dusk. She'd curl up on the sofa, headphones on, face lit by distant faces on her screen. We spoke less of the future. My parents started calling, gently inquiring if Anna seemed all right. I deflected. By summer, I felt like a border guard in my own home, passing Anna in the hallway, her with a laptop, me with a fresh cup of coffee, neither quite looking at the other. When she posed for selfies, I no longer recognized the smile or the men and women who reacted to her stories. I still thought she loved me. I convinced myself love was just hard for two people living in permanent triage. The illusion broke one Thursday in late July. IT happened on my second overnight in a row, one of those sweltering July shifts where the city seems determined to hand you the worst it has to offer. 3 traumas and a pediatric code blue before sunrise. I left the hospital at 8 a.m. with nerves raw as open skin, desperate for blackout curtains and 6 hours of dreamless quiet. I texted Anna before entering the building, survived. On my way up, but got no answer. The apartment was dark and neat, too neat. A single coffee mug sat in the sink, a mostly full bottle of wine on the table still uncorked, her phone nowhere in sight. The balcony door was cracked open, letting in a ribbon of humid air. I padded through the rooms, my brain cataloging details as if walking a scene I hadn't been invited to. Anna was gone until noon. When she slipped in, she looked staged. Hair done up, perfume strong, a hint of makeup she never wore during work-from-home days. She acted surprised to see me, flustered, carrying a laptop bag I didn't recognize. I started to ask how the morning went, but she brushed past, mumbling about a tight deadline. She disappeared for the rest of the day. I crashed for 4 hours and woke to the sound of her laughing on the phone. When I wandered to the kitchen to make coffee, she cut her call off, muttered, "Hospital life must be nice, all that flexibility," and retreated to the bathroom, locking the door behind her. The comment stung. That night, she slept in the guest room. In the coming weeks, the pattern sharpened. Anna began accusing me, subtly, and then not so subtly, of being distant, cold, robotic. The first time she used the word controlling, it came with a shrug and a mock laugh. "You probably can't help it. You're good at running things." She complained about the cameras she herself had once advocated for, calling them weird and overkill. She joked, just a little too often, about having to report me to HR. At first I tried to fix it, offered to remove the cameras, to quit my overtime, to go to therapy. Nothing landed. Anna would sigh, tell me I was missing the point, and retreat to her digital world, her circle of activist friends and new group chats. Worse, she started to gatekeep the apartment itself, reprimanded me for moving her stuff, reminded me this wasn't my hospital zone. I started to feel like a squatter, welcome on sufferance, but not at home. One Monday evening, after an especially brutal shift, I found her arranging stacks of paperwork across the living room. She looked up stiffly. "These are confidential. Please don't touch." I tried to defuse. "Anything you want to talk about?" Her eyes flashed. I said don't. Gaslighting goes both ways, you know. That word, gaslighting. I'd heard it from colleagues in trauma support, from psychiatric consults. I'd seen it destroy marriages, careers, even drive people to the edge. But hearing it from Anna, leveled at me, felt like an invisible gun pressed to my temple. That night, lying awake, I traced every conversation of the last 6 months, wondering if I'd missed the fatal step. Am I cold? Too methodical? Is this my fault? The doubt chewed at the edges of my confidence. At work, I stitched wounds closed with steady hands, made life-and-death decisions every day. But now, at home, I second-guessed a missed text, a wrong word, a glance. Still, despite every red flag, I clung to hope. I chalked up her distance to burnout, stress, whatever. Maybe working in a hospital had made me immune to everything except the bluntest of traumas. Then, the bank card incident. Late one August night, bleary after a double, I tried to buy groceries and my card was declined. Surprised, I'd been paid 2 days prior. I checked my statements. Dozens of small, odd charges. Ride shares, takeout, cosmetic shops, all in another part of town. I confronted Anna, careful to keep the accusatory edge out of my voice. She wept, loud, theatrical sobs, accusing me in turn of financial abuse. You track every dollar I spend. You're obsessed with control. I tried to be gentle. I'm just asking where the charges came from, Anna. She stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door so hard the camera in the hallway whined and clicked. I stared at the screen, suddenly hyper-aware of my own surveillance. She didn't return until the next day. Labor Day weekend, she announced she was taking a wellness retreat with friends. I worked 3 overnights straight and hardly noticed her packing. When I returned Sunday morning, the apartment was all shadows and silence. A single note on the counter, in her handwriting, "Don't wait up." Restless, I idly checked the security app for the first time in weeks. Motion detection flagged a window. Friday, 2:18 a.m. Curious, I clicked play. I saw Anna, not alone, entering with a man I didn't recognize, laughing, carrying backpacks. They spent 45 minutes in the apartment, angling off camera into the guest room, then kitchen, then the living room. The camera caught laughter, then nothing until they left. My pulse hammered. I sat frozen, watching the loop repeat, unable to process what I was seeing. The next morning, Anna came home, acting as though nothing had changed. I said nothing. Instead, I started making copies of every video, every log entry, every bank statement. I felt hollow and numb, the old, clinical part of my brain taking over. It was a defense I recognized from trauma. Get the facts, document everything. Feel later, I thought I'd seen every type of accusation that can be weaponized in a relationship, having patched up victims and perpetrators alike in exam rooms thick with aftershocks. Nothing prepares you to become the accused. It started innocuously, a cold war of text messages, a steady withdrawal of affection. Anna barely looked at me, let alone spoke, except to issue clipped instructions or warnings. At work, I felt useful. At home, radioactive. I buried myself deeper in hospital life, volunteering for an extra shift here, an overtime stretch there. My friends in the ER assumed I was saving money for a honeymoon. I let them believe it. A week later, after one of my longer overnight stretches, I returned home to an empty apartment, fridge raided, bedroom in disarray, and a strange sense of being watched. Anna's belongings looked shuffled, boxes half opened, drawers misaligned. My gut twisted. I'd seen this kind of exit strategy play out before, a slow erosion, and then, one day, a clean break. That evening, I unlocked my phone to a barrage of emails and messages, first from Anna, and then from building management. She had filed a formal complaint, alleging emotional control, privacy violations, financial surveillance, and aggressive intimidation. Her message to me was short, almost emotionless. "I can't do this anymore. You know why." 2 hours later, the police called. A detective asked if I could come in for a conversation, tone carefully neutral. My hands shook as I texted my hospital's union lawyer, the same calm presence who'd guided dozens of overworked residents through malpractice scares and wrongful accusations. His response was immediate. "Say nothing. Meet me first. Bring all records, videos, statements, bank files, security logs. Do not respond to her in writing. Zero communication except through counsel. You know the drill." I sat in my gloomy kitchen that night, scrolling years of shared photos, trying to pinpoint the moment Anna's smile had slipped into something performative. My own face in those photos looked tired, but solid, unaware of the fracture lines expanding under the surface. What did I miss? Could I have stopped this if I'd been home more, loved her differently, listened harder? Hospitals teach you to tree off, to prioritize the bleeders, but nothing trains you to spot the fatal slow leak of trust. I spent the next day in logistical purgatory, preparing documents, reviewing every byte of data, organizing video feeds by date and event. It was grueling, sterile work. It reminded me of prepping for an M&M, morbidity and mortality. Review, listing each moment of clinical failure without blinding yourself with shame. Anna's accusations went public before the law caught up. Social media posts appeared in private groups. Escaping emotional abusers, my story isn't unique. Mutual friends withdrew. My mother called, voice shaky, after reading a vague post tagged #BelieveWomen. Is there something you need to tell us, Noah? Humiliation eclipsed my anger. When I next turned up at the ER, colleagues glanced at me, eyes quickly averting. Someone, quietly, kindly, suggested I take a few days off and let the storm pass. I refused. If I'd learned anything, it was that absence is an admission in the court of public opinion. That week, Anna made her move. Through her lawyer, she sent a formal demand for a transition package, her term for what was, essentially, hush money. Given your financial situation and professional standing, it's in your best interest to resolve this quietly. $40,000 will cover costs and prevent a more public dispute. The threat was as explicit as it was chilling. Cooperate, or risk my career, reputation, and medical license. My own lawyer barely contained his disgust. She wants you to pay for her silence. Fortunately, you've kept receipts, not only for the money, but for the truth. Together, we submitted a binder's worth of records to the detective. Entry and exit camera logs proving Anna's solo comings and goings. Bank data, flagged and annotated. Copies of every conversation where Anna describes feeling safe, praising the security system. Footage showing her inviting guests home while I worked, documented to the minute. Most crucially, the living room camera captured a late-night conversation. Anna, on a video call, rehearsing accusations, laughing with a friend. If this doesn't work, at least I'll get something out of it. Noah's always too busy to notice anything anyway. The next day, my phone rang. This time, the detective's tone was almost gentle. Dr. Levin, can you come by the station? We'd like your statement, on the record. By the way, bring those videos. My lawyer and I replayed hours of footage before two quietly scandalized officers and a DA's paralegal. We pointed out inconsistencies, timelines, and his own words. When the final file ended, the detective leaned back, pinched the bridge of his nose, and said, Jesus, she built her whole case for this. Victim and villain now swapped places in the official record, and Anna went quiet, at least legally. The online world, however, is slower to forget. I received dozens of messages, some apologizing, most just drifting away. My social circle vaporized overnight. My parents, stolid and nervous, asked if it was safe for me to continue in the city. Hospital administration held a formal meeting, reviewing my documentation, ultimately reaffirming support, but reminding me to exercise extra caution regarding hospital policy and media presence. I lost several old friends forever. Only a handful, a nurse, a radiology tech, two of Anna's ex-friends, stayed in touch. But my name, battered though it was, remained intact. Anna never returned to the apartment. Her lawyer attempted a final, limp threat involving defamation, but my own attorney responded with copies of every video and transcript. The message was clear: pursue this, and the evidence will become a public record. All requests ceased. I started sleeping again, fitful but better. The apartment, once a stage for an invisible war, began to feel lighter in the mornings. Was it over? Not quite. Took. Spasiba, продолжаю, final, итоговое осмысление, чтобы довести объем примерно до 4300 слов. В этой части главный герой проходит через последствия всего случившегося. Одиночество, осмысление опыта, жизнь после скандала и вывода, которые он для себя делает. Part 4. Aftermath. The legal closure felt anticlimactic, more like a paperwork glitch in the hospital's EMR than the verdict of a real-life disaster. No handcuffs or formal apologies, just an archive file in the DA's system marked unfounded, charges withdrawn. Yet the fallout spread silently, in concentric circles through every layer of my life. The first days without Anna were tense and heavy, like the soft ache after a night shift, relief on the surface, anxiety just beneath. waiting for another code to sound. I moved from room to room, cleaning compulsively, stripping the bed, bleaching the bathroom, donating bags of clothes, throwing away anything of hers bearing a scent, a memory, a note. The emptiness was both freedom and accusation. I returned to my usual shifts with a new set of invisible wounds. I was jumpy, apologetic, sometimes startling at a beeping pager or a voice raised in the nurse's station. My colleagues, having reviewed enough of my evidence to know the truth but not enough to understand, offered a cold solidarity, respectful, distant, as if grieving someone I had lost without a funeral. They tiptoed around the topic. "You holding up, Doc? Let us know if you need to swap a shift." I nodded, grateful for the care beneath the awkwardness, but I hung onto the isolation. If you're used to running toward trouble, it's hard to admit you might be carrying it inside you. At night, I found myself scrolling through old chats with Anna, replaying every misunderstanding, every missed signal. What was the moment when love curdled into strategy, when partnership became a ledger of debts? I rebuilt the timeline the way I would for a sepsis case. Lab results, vital signs, first complaint of fever, but human hearts don't show damage the way white blood cells do. There is no charting the day someone you trusted chooses to hurt you for their own survival. The city's rhythm returned bit by bit, subway screeches, distant sirens, food truck lines outside the emergency bay. But the silence at home grew oppressive. I started sleeping on the couch, then the guest bed, then finally my own bed again, ritualistically changing pillowcases as if erasing the traces of Anna's outline. On weekends, I reorganized, moved the plants to the balcony, hung new art, bought different sheets, canceled streaming services I never watched. Therapy became not just a suggestion, but a necessity. Hospital insurance covered 12 sessions a year. I used every one. My therapist was a pragmatic woman in her 50s, sharp, practical, unafraid to challenge me. She forced me to abandon the habits of clinical detachment I wielded on the job. "You do realize," she said one evening after hearing my full account, "that you kept expecting the mess to announce itself, like a trauma code. But betrayal rarely arrives with sirens. Most of it happens in whispers." I found that strangely comforting. We talked about guilt, irrational but stubborn, about helplessness, surprisingly familiar for an ER doc, and about the impossibility of truly safeguarding yourself. "You followed the protocols," she said. "You documented, you called for help, you used evidence. That's all you can do. The rest is learning to trust the recovery process, even when the injury is invisible." Months passed. The apartment lost its gloom. The city thawed into spring. I saw Anna's name on neighborhood Facebook groups less and less. Word spread about the dismissal of her claims, sometimes accurately, sometimes warped into rumors. She moved out of state. A colleague heard. Another saw her working in a downtown nonprofit, looking thinner, tense. I kept my distance, focused on work and the simplicity of passing shifts, the comfort of other people's medical needs. My wider social world had shrunk, but those left were loyal. Krista, the nurse who dropped off groceries after every overnight. Amir in radiology, who invited me to boxing class and never once brought up Anna. My sister, who called after every major holiday. Some friends I'd lost forever. Those who stood with the victim, out of principle and couldn't, or wouldn't, revisit their position. I stopped nursing resentments. I understood the desire to believe, to have moral clarity, to pick a side. I just wished their trust had not been so easily reassigned. Professional repercussions, thankfully, were brief. Hospital administration's HR meeting ended with formal support and a quiet warning. "In this era, document everything. Keep your distance from workplace drama. Remember your value to the hospital." And I did. I became almost paranoid about receipts, keeping records, logging hours, CCNG work emails, documenting every patient interaction. It was exhausting, but it soothed my nerves for a time. As my therapist said, "It's what you know, but don't let it become your new prison." By the second spring without Anna, daily life found its own peculiar calm. I started running in the mornings, exploring city sections I'd ignored for years. My apartment became lived in again, messy, sometimes, but no longer haunted. I bought a battered acoustic guitar and plucked out old songs I barely remembered. Small routines built up. Soup on Sundays, video calls with my parents, chess on my phone before bed. Sometimes I would catch myself being hyper-vigilant. interrogating a new friend's tone, overanalyzing a colleague's lack of eye contact, checking the security app to make sure the cameras were still only pointed at doors and windows. Mostly, though, distrust receded with time. I learned boundaries, the difference between clinical observation and chronic suspicion. I stopped apologizing reflexively for things I didn't do. Romantic life was slow to return. I went on a handful of awkward dates. Always careful, always upfront about my story, sometimes too much so. Some would go cold after hearing the details. Others found my honesty reassuring. One woman, a pediatric resident named Meg, laughed at my cautious approach, saying, "You're the most thoroughly documented human being I know." It's weirdly endearing. We started seeing each other, slowly, with boundaries and small joys, sunset runs, homemade dinners, movies at home. She never commented on the cameras, which I'd left where they were. It wasn't about suspicion anymore. It was about not having to pretend ever again. The lessons of the past year settled gradually. A good person can lose themselves when hungry for power or safety. Evil rarely arrives in a villain's cape. Most often it's disguised as need, or pain, or desperation to rewrite a story. Even those who heal others can be blindsided, can be scarred, can need saving too. Mostly, I learned that the wounds you can't see take the longest to close. But healing is possible, with patience, help, and ruthless honesty. Sometimes, before dawn, I sit on the balcony with a mug of coffee and look at the city lights. I remember everything, but I'm not weighed down by it. Anna exists for me as both lesson and history, evidence of how love can turn, how alert you have to be, how even the best intentions can be undermined by fear. I'm not grateful for what happened, but I am stronger and less likely to trade my peace for another person's approval. My boundaries are clearer, my sense of self more rooted, and my understanding of vulnerability deeper than any trauma lecture could teach. And for the first time in years, I sleep. Sometimes dreamlessly, sometimes not, knowing I did what I could. The rest is just recovery.